It got very little attention here in America.
Well, it's an interesting part of the book. We're going to take a small break now, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Afterwards and several other C-SPAN programs are available for download as podcasts. Visit booktv.org. More with Gene Cummings and Thomas Frank.
Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Barack Obama has announced Senator Joe Biden of Delaware as his vice presidential running mate. Tonight at 11 Eastern and Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern on Book TV, Senator Biden's book Promises to Keep on Life and Politics. From last year, a personal and political memoir. He discusses the adversities he's had to work through, including the loss of his first wife and child. He also provides his take on such events as 9/11 and his experiences working in the Senate under 7 different presidential administrations. Democratic vice presidential nominee Senator Joe Biden on Book TV.
Afterwards, with Gene Cummings and Thomas Frank, continues.
And welcome back. We're talking with Tom Frank, the author of The Wrecking Crew, How Conservatives Rule. Now, you mentioned all the research you had done on South Africa for that section of the book. And what struck me about the book is you have almost 100 pages of notes attached to the back of this book. I mean,
yeah.
and I just
and it's
wondered...
required reading, Gene. You can't get out of it.
Actually, I have to admit, read the footnotes. Some of them are pretty funny. But I just wondered if that is your habit, or did you expect challenges, and so you wanted to make darn sure it was documented, or...
Oh, it's just because of the academic background. I started doing that in graduate school, and well, you learn to use footnotes. I mean, and it's also a courtesy to the researchers that come after you. They'll want to be able to look this stuff up, and and there'll undoubtedly be more books about Jack Abramoff, and people want to know where to find this stuff. But I also discovered, look, you can have a lot of fun with footnotes. In addition to that, just putting in the dry, it was in the New York Times on, July 15th. You can also put some, you can also use them to go off on tangents, which I tend to do a lot. And
I noticed a few.
And yeah, so that's why.
And asides. Now, the other thing that struck me is your primary villains are Abramoff, Grover Norquist, who runs...
I wouldn't call him a villain. He's a fascinating man. He's in some ways a great political genius.
Okay, he's head of Americans for Tax Reform. So instead of villains, I'll use the word characters.
Yeah.
Your primary characters are Abramoff and Grover Norquist and Newt and former Speaker
Tom DeLay.
And Tom DeLay. And the current administration gets a fair amount of play in the book as well. But given the 2 or 3 decades that you're documenting here, I thought Reagan and the first Bush administration, they got touches, but I wondered why there wasn't more emphasis on the leadership of those administrations as compared to later. I just wondered because these guys, I mean, we're talking about college Republicans laying the groundwork for, a very big philosophy of conservatism, and in your book and in your thesis, a very destructive approach to government. But
that seems highly unlikely.
Yeah, they were.
I actually wouldn't say that they laid the groundwork. I'd say that they exemplified it.
Okay.
And I'm interested in them because, well, obviously because Abramoff and Norquist were big players in the college Republicans. But before them, there was a group called the Young Americans for Freedom. I think they're still around in some form, the YAF. And a lot of my characters came out of that as well. That was a kind of forerunner of Abramoff's College Republicans, a very conservative group, and very prominent in the Reagan administration. Well, I'm sure they're in this current administration as well. But these youth groups don't by themselves figure everything out. They're just, you see a lot of these ideas at their most naked when these guys are kids and are writing, well, they're not kids, they're in their 20s, and they're writing in their magazines and, giving interviews and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And, but what about Reagan, the Reagan administration and the first Bush administration? Did you, I wondered if you found in them something less, was there tension with government and governing less so than what we see in the current Bush administration? Was that your assessment, that their antipathy towards government and its functioning, was it less?
Wasn't as pronounced. No, I think that Reagan was really the he's the one that really laid the groundwork for this model, in which you have people from industry running the regulatory agency that oversees that industry. That was the Reagan administration is where you really started seeing that. I mean, it had existed before. Don't get me wrong. There's examples of this going all the way back to the Grover Cleveland administration. There's the most famous example. Actually goes back to the Grover Cleveland administration, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which the railroads, it was the first regulatory body in America. The railroads almost immediately captured it, and started running it would get their man appointed to head it in this sort of thing. It was fascinating. But Reagan was really the mastermind of this, putting in people like James Watt, and he was at the Department of the Interior. Right, and then who was it at EPA? Ann Gorsuch. The thing is that these names don't really mean anything to viewers anymore. But they're fascinating stories from the 1980s about how this stuff was done. Reagan really was the first administration where it was just done on a massive scale. By the way, another one of my favorite examples is from the Nixon administration. Nixon dreamed up a lot of this, but wasn't able to do it. First of all, because he had, Democratic Congress to deal with. So did Reagan, by and large. And then, second of all, because he was distracted by something called Watergate. He couldn't really put his whole focus on it. But one of the funnier stories that I unearthed while I was doing this research was of the OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity, which had been set up under Lyndon Johnson, and this was going to be the flagship of what they used to call the war on poverty. Okay, Nixon gets into office, and he decides he's going to wreck the OEO. He is going to destroy this agency. Well, how's he going to do it? Because Congress isn't going to repeal the law. Congress has funded the agency even. Well, he put a guy in charge of it, a very interesting character, another one of these sort of conservative geniuses who I find very attractive in a certain way. Politically, I find them kind of repugnant, but his name was Howard Phillips anyway. He runs for president every now and then, or the last couple cycles on a third-party ticket. But President Nixon put him in as the acting head of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and the guy proceeded just to demolish the agency. And he was very open about it and would give interviews to the press about what he was doing and why. And it's a fascinating story. And that's sort of the earliest incarnation of this. And under Bush, of course, now you have a Republican Congress, so it's allowed to run. It can go to its. Or I'm sorry, you don't have a Republican Congress anymore. But for a while there, you did, and the people he appointed would get in, and there was nothing to stop them. And then there's also the fact that the media itself has really lost the kind of power that it had in, say, the age of Nixon or the age of Reagan. When you had the big three networks, remember how Johnson and Nixon would pay such close attention to what they were saying. The Washington Post carried a big stick back in those days. Not no more. I mean, it's they can just brush that off if they feel like it now. And so a lot of things have changed, and it's allowed them to really just to roll this model out to a maximum extent.
Now, the premise that we have to take through your book is that government can work, and that they've wrecked it, but that there were, moments of, government at its best. You cite some periods near the New Deal and the 60s, but is that a little nostalgic? I mean,
come on.
Does it?
That's who I am.
There you go. But I mean, there are plenty who would say, look, the conservatives aren't really wrecking the government. The government itself is unwieldy, it's complex, and it's duplicative, and it really isn't, the answer
Yeah, they would say that it is the nature of government to fail. So what happened after Hurricane Katrina, they'd say, is it's not that government dropped the ball. It's that government always drops the ball. This is why you've got to privatize everything. Let Walmart handle it, because government can't do it. I think that's baloney. I'm sorry, Gene.
It's okay. I'm doing a little devil's advocate here.
No. I just, I mean, you're such a nice person. I don't want to. I'm not. I'm not good at TV.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, viewers. I'm not.
You're doing fine.
Government can work. This is, as you said, this is absolutely essential to what I believe. It's the basic premise of what I write about, and there are also countless examples of government working. Whether we're talking about back in the most of the ones that I use are back in the